There were barricades, and people shouting, and policemen everywhere. I thought, maybe it's Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras was always noisy. That's what 6-year-old Ruby Bridges thought as she was being escorted to her new school, William Franz Elementary, by United States Marshals. Ruby Bridges was one of the first and youngest African Americans to help push forward the new integration laws by going to a previously all-white school. Little did she know, she would help change how America does the school system for years to come. On September 8, 1954, a beautiful baby girl, Ruby Nell Bridges, was born in Tylertown, Mississippi. She eventually became the oldest of 8. In Mississippi, her parents were sharecroppers, and by the time she was 4, they decided that they'd move to New Orleans to help get a better life and better jobs. They lived on an all-black block. All the kids would play outside and walk to school together. At that age, Ruby and her friends knew nothing about the cruelties of racism. Faith played a very important part in her family. In her book, Through My Eyes, Ruby says this about her mother. She taught us there is a power we can pray to anytime. Also, at Bethel University this last spring, she was there for a Q&A session, and at the Q&A session, she told a story about when she was younger, and when she was being ridiculed and harassed on her way to school. She ended up getting nightmares about it. She went to her mom and was telling her about the nightmares. Her mom asked her, "Ruby, did you say your prayers before bed?" And Ruby would say, I forgot. Her mom would tell her to go back to bed and say her prayers. When she went back to bed and said her prayers, the bad dreams went away. In 1954, ironically the same year that Ruby was born, the separate but equal laws were banned. And also in her book, it says, by 1957, less than 2% of Southern schools had been integrated. That was 3 years to start integrating schools, and less than 2% had started to be integrated. Also in 1957 is when the Little Rock Nine happened. Federal court ended up setting a deadline for integration in schools. They set it for September 1960. Later, they switched it to November of 1960. One day, an opportunity arose for Ruby, as because of the integration, they were trying to see what kids could go to the white schools. So they ended up to have a test to see what kids were smart enough. Out of 140 kids that were tested, 6 of them passed. Ruby, luckily, was one of the 6. They were supposed to start school in September, but as I previously said, it got pushed to November. By the time November rolled around, the 2 other girls who were going to go to the school that Ruby was going to go to, they had dropped out. So now it was just Ruby by herself. On November 14th, 1960, Ruby finally got to go to William Franz Elementary. But the first few days was kind of just sitting around while a lot of white parents would come and argue with the principal and say that this isn't right, and there was lots of protests and riots going on. When she finally got to actually start school, she got to meet her teacher, Mrs. Henry, who was the best person she could ever think of to be her teacher. She taught her everything. They played together. They did everything together. Mrs. Henry was allowed to go eat lunch with other teachers, though, so that left Ruby alone. Ruby really wanted to see the other kids, and she could smell the food in the cafeteria. She ended up hiding her food, saying she didn't like it because she wanted to go to the cafeteria. Eventually, everyone found out about the food, and eventually she got to tour the school and see the cafeteria. But when she went, no one was there. Then finally in the spring, some of the students were able to come and visit her in her class. One of the boys in the class said, "I can't play with you. My mom says I can't play with you because you're black. Ruby then found out that this was all about her skin color. But at the same time, she wasn't mad at the boy, because if her parents had told her not to play with someone, she wouldn't have either. Now, she goes around talking to schools, including colleges, and at conferences about what this was really like. And one of the things that she says when she's speaking, and she said this at chapel when she came and spoke to us at chapel, was racism is a grown-up disease, and we better stop using our kids to spread it. As I mentioned her book, here is a book she has written. A little bit before this, she had written a children's book in 1995. In 1996, her teacher, Mrs. Henry, was able to reunite with her on none other than The Oprah Show. To conclude, when Ruby Bridges was only 6, she was one of the first African Americans to be integrated into a previously all-white school. And she would make a lasting impact on America's schools that last even till today. We've learned about where she came from, what the civil rights movement was like in the 1950s and 60s. We also learned of November 14th, when she was finally able to go to school, and also some of her accomplishments, such as the books. Ruby ends her book with this following statement, and I find it only appropriate to end the speech the same way. She says, "I know that experience comes to us for a purpose, and if we follow the guidance of the Spirit within us, we will probably find the purpose is a good one. Thank you."